You're listening to the No Schedule Man podcast with Kevin Bulmer, exploring real stories and lessons learned with a variety of special guests. To learn more about Kevin and to access other episodes of the podcast, please visit noscheduleman.com and connect and contribute at No Schedule Man on Twitter or Instagram and on Facebook, YouTube, and SoundCloud, all /No Schedule Man. Thanks for listening and enjoy the No Schedule Man podcast.
I've been known to struggle with reality, not that it is any real mystery.
Hi, I'm Kevin Bulmer. Thank you for finding the show. It's great to have you here, and I appreciate you making me a little part of your journey. I'd love to hear from you and learn what brought you to the show. Jump on our email list at noscheduleman.com/emailvip. That's a great way for us to keep in touch. As always, we're offering a variety of bonuses to anybody that jumps on the email list, and we'll send out some exclusive content and resources that I sure hope will be a help to you in your journey. And whenever you get any of those emails, if you reply to that, that'll come right back to me. It's a great way for us to exchange ideas and share resources that way. Would love to have you on board. So, for this episode, what does a NASCAR-style pit crew changing tires have to do with high-performing business culture? Well, a lot, as it turns out. And Bob Parker is the man who puts people quite literally into the action to find that out. Bob is a speaker, an experienced leader, management consultant, and facilitator and author of the Pit Crew Challenge, Winning Customers Through Teaming. Now, the Pit Crew Challenge is a name that also serves for Bob's benchmark program for the last many years. It's a metaphorical learning experience that builds high-performing cultures leading to greater efficiencies. Now, Bob does this by bringing an actual late model, like a NASCAR-style race car, directly to the people. At the time of this recording, Bob and his team have put well over 16,000 different business people through the Pit Crew Challenge program, changing well over 155,000 wheel nuts in the process, traveling all over North America and around the world. Now, Bob's also the man behind the brand Walk on Wet Paint, which is a really neat idea that helps encourage people to help break free from their constraints, whether they be real or perceived constraints. How do you get out of that corner that you may either be painted into or perceived that you have painted yourself into? Bob and I are going to talk about that. Some key takeaways to listen for in my discussion with Bob. Well, first of all, the idea of culture as opposed to team building. A culture is a word I hear tossed around a lot, frankly, by people who really don't know what they're talking about. It can't be faked. A culture cannot be just declared and then put into being. It has to become. Now, Bob speaks to that idea in our discussion. Listen to that. I can tell it was really important for Bob as well. Number two, I love this one, the importance of failing. Listen for Bob's reflections on his experiences with junior achievement and what it taught him about the value of failing. This is something that we're going to need to explore more in the weeks and months and probably years ahead. So many of us, including yours truly, are afraid of failing or are showing that we're doing anything less than perfection, which is unattainable. But now I'm off the beaten path and editorializing. But the value of failing. Listen for what Bob has to say about that. And number three, one loose lug nut. Just one. Not even falling off, but just one loose lug nut. And what that can cost you in business and in life. Now, one wheel nut, or lug nut, whichever you like, being just the slightest bit loose will magnify itself over time into a bad vibration. Now, this is a great metaphor not only for building winning cultures in the workplace, but for anything in life, I think. Little becomes big. It works both ways, for good and for bad. Get all the little things right and they'll become a big success eventually, but get some of those little things wrong, like leaving just one loose lug nut, you will have a big mess on your hands at some point. Listen for that. It was a lot of fun to get back into talking about some of this racing stuff. It reminded me of what drew me into that business to begin with so many years ago. And I also just really quickly want to say hi to my pals, Ron Sheridan and Ken Kellestein. I've not seen either of them in several years, but I know that they're key in the race car part of the equation for the Pit Crew Challenge. I had the great pleasure to get to know Ron and Ken in my time at Delaware Speedway, and I can completely understand why Bob Parker speaks so highly of them and the rest of his race team with the Pit Crew Challenge. What a terrific group of people. Here's my conversation with Bob Parker on the No Schedule Man podcast. Bob, I'm curious to know, from the time that you first had the seed of an idea of taking corporate workers and executives and having them changing tires on a race car to actually making it happen, how much wet paint did you perceive between those two things?
Oh, there was a lot of wet paint. I'll tell you, the first time I came up with this idea, I was actually in front of the client. I came up with the idea sitting down in a meeting as we were just talking things through. And what's unique about me, and maybe not completely unique, I'm sure other people have this as well, is there's a kind of sometimes a short circuit between my brain and my tongue, and things come out without them being completely thought through. But it's worked well for me because it allows some other people to grab onto those ideas and that maybe are half-baked and utilize them. So I came up with this idea in front of the client, and he says, well, that sounds like a great idea. Why don't we do it? And we'll give you a call in a couple days, and we'll see if we can put something together. Well, I drove home. It was about a 20-minute drive, and during my drive, all I could think of was, you're an idiot. What are you thinking? And I also realized, wow, I'm really walking on wet paint today. I am stepping outside of what I would normally do. And it's become a brilliant program over the years.
Now, for anybody that's listening, we're going to go back and fill in a lot of blanks here. I know we sort of jumped in about 2/3 of the way through the story, but I'm wondering if we can get some context, and maybe I can set it up for you, Bob. I was interested to read in some of the materials about you where you talked about getting to a point after a certain amount of time, a good amount of time as a speaker, realizing that you thought maybe people don't like having to hire speakers so much as they really want to be involved and interactive. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but it seems like that was sort of the environment that led to what became Pit Crew Challenge. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would think so. The initial engagement piece is, show me how I'm involved and it's a part of me. And once you can show me that this is about me, then I'll buy into the rest of it. And until you show me that this is about me, I'm not listening, and I don't care.
So which was first, that recognition or the Pit Crew idea?
Pit Crew idea actually came first.
Okay.
So actually, the idea came second, but from the conversation of what can we do to get the people engaged? How can we get the buy-in at the very beginning? So we were working with, when I created this program, we're working with a plant that had about 15 supervisors and managers. And they really needed to cover some specific learning outcomes, around how could they communicate better? How could they work together better as a team? The client wanted to create some benchmarking where, let's set some benches. Let's try to create a continuous improvement cycle and things of that nature. And we designed the program that we were going to create for them around those learning outcomes. And it was all going to be classroom-based, and we'll talk through some of these sorts of concepts. And then we thought, well, how do we get these guys to buy into these long training programs around these topics that they really weren't that interested in talking about? And then we thought, well, maybe if we gave them an experience, what could we do to get them involved in it so that they would start to share with people their experience? And every time they shared their experience, they were buying into it. It's like when you go to a movie, if you're the first one that goes to the movie, you can't wait to tell your friends that haven't gone to the movie how great the movie was. And now you get to own that. And that's what experiential education became for me.
So what was the rest of the context then that even had a race car as sort of even in your periphery as something that could answer that idea that you just described?
Yeah, it's fascinating because again, with this client, we looked at the audience, and it's very important to actually start with your audience. Start where they are and take the audience to where you need them to be. Don't start where you want them to be and try to drag them kicking and screaming to it. It's a huge difference in development. We see that so often when we go into a training program or we go to see a speaker. If the speaker doesn't start where you are and get you to come along on the journey, you're fighting and kicking the whole time. So when we started to figure out how could we get these guys into this program, we started thinking of sports metaphors. We just went there because we thought that anything else would maybe be too much of a reach. So we kicked around all sorts of different sports metaphors, and nothing seemed to resonate until that moment when I came up with the idea of the most highly efficient team in all of sport. For me, I said that's a NASCAR pit crew. You know, those teams change those tires so quickly, so efficiently, and they determine the outcome of the race. And they're always trying to do better. And they actually needed to utilize all those skills that we wanted to teach in order to execute it well. So the next thought was, well, why don't we call it pit crew training? And then we'll actually bring in a race car for a day. And that's how the idea came up.
If I'm hearing you correctly, you were thinking about bringing in the race car before you knew where you'd ever find one.
Absolutely, that's true. We did not have a race car. In fact, when I was driving home in that 20 minutes, what was going through my mind as I was walking on that wet paint, metaphorically, was, boy, I hope they can't find a race car. Then I don't have to try to do this thing, which I know very little about.
I'm leading you down this path for a reason. We'll see if this materializes anywhere close to the way I'm thinking that it might. How much knowledge did you have of racing and the racing industry at that point to begin with?
Sunday afternoons as a 10-year-old watching NASCAR with my father, whining the whole time that, Dad, can we watch anything else but racing? But those experiences as a child, they never leave you. And who knew that so many years later, that experience would lead to a suggestion, which would ultimately lead to a career. I thank my dad for forcing me to watch those races. I had very little context around racing. I just knew that of all sport, a NASCAR pit crew, they're pretty darn good.
So that was rattling around in your consciousness somewhere, but certainly wasn't front of mind. It sounds like that's fair to say.
Absolutely.
And let's maybe jump forward just to give people a little bit of an idea. Just sort of real quickly, what are one or two places that immediately come to mind that were among the largest challenges to actually get the race car to it and do the presentation?
Well, we've been all over North America, and we've been to Europe, we've been to South Africa. Certainly we did not take a car to South Africa. We borrowed a car when we were down there. So logistically, that wasn't too much of a challenge. I would say that when we went to Germany and to France, we borrowed some race cars over there. But as luck would have it, my crew chief, who builds race cars when he's not working for me, had a client over in Europe that was buying race cars for a NASCAR series. In fact, he owns the NASCAR series in Europe. And all the race cars that are in Europe were built here in London, Ontario. And we had a very easy phone call at that point. But logistically, the challenge was the race team, they were from France, and they were French. And unfortunately, my grade 9 French wasn't as good as I would have liked it to have been. But we muddled through it with the French team that we had there that helped us out. And I would say that was one of our greatest challenges, but also a huge reward to be able to do it like that.
So I wasn't even thinking transcontinental. That's even better. But my point in taking us there is to now go back to where you're in the meeting and you're looking for some sort of a teamwork, interactive scenario as you described. You mentioned, what about a pit crew? What about a race car?
Right.
And, of course, at that point, you would never have been able to know that you were going to get to the places that you just described. But you at least would need to know, okay, A, I'm not particularly involved in the NASCAR racing community, and I've got to tap into at least somebody that with some knowledge there. B, I need a car, and I not only need a car, but I'm going to need it repeatedly, and I'm going to need some people to, and on and on and on. People can fill in the blanks, but you immediately would have had all sorts of challenges stacked up against you, but you didn't let that stop you.
No, I didn't. In fact, I mean, I had the self-doubt, like a lot of people do, when they are going outside of their comfort zone, when they're doing things that are unique and challenging. There's often a time where you want to step back and into the area of comfort. So for me, yeah, I absolutely knew that this was going to be a challenge, but I also knew that I had the support of the client. I had a good relationship.
Right.
And so they were the ones that actually did the reach out. They had some contacts, more than I did. They had one contact. Well, that was one more than I had. So they reached out to a guy who used to race in the truck series, and they used to sponsor him. So they reached out to this guy, and he had retired from racing, hadn't raced in a while, but he had been at the track and the previous week, and he went down into the pits, and he saw this team that was there. He watched how they raced, and from his experience in racing, he could tell that this team, they were pros. And not only were they pros, they knew their stuff, and they were nice people. He took his son down into the pits, and the driver took him, my driver, Ron Sheridan, took him into the car, his son into the car, made his son feel completely welcome. And when my client called him to ask, who would you then recommend if you can't help us, he immediately said, well, it has to be Ron Sheridan. And that's how we were able just to find him, by getting a name, and he was more than willing to help us out. So in spite of the fact it may have sounded overly difficult, it was just a couple of phone calls. It came down to the relationships and relying on the people who had those relationships.
But it's the moving forward, right? I mean, and that's, now we're coming to why I wanted to stick there for a moment, and you illustrated it, I think, Bob, is how many times have all of us had an idea and then immediately, that'll never work. Or we can't have, and to give it further context, you at that point, jump in and smack me if I'm wrong, but you'd established a pretty successful career for yourself by this point, right? I mean, it wasn't as if you were desperately looking for some way to pull yourself out of the quicksand. You'd established yourself pretty well and would have maybe had lots of reasons to go, I can just kind of go back to what I know works here. But you didn't. You didn't let those obstacles, and it unfolded for you.
You're very right. It did. I was established enough. I was still trying to grow my business. I was still looking to add to my business. But adding a race car to my business, that was not what I was thinking. I was thinking, how do I get the rest of this training that I wanted to do? Remember, this was day one of the training. This was the kickoff, and the kickoff eventually became its own program. Afterwards, I was looking for the next 3 weeks of training that I was going to get. And in my mind, I thought when I created this Pit Crew Challenge program that it would be a great opening to develop additional training. So it would just become a small component of my business. Little did I know that the universe had different plans, because then I started partnering with other organizations that did the other 3 weeks of training and just wanted me to do the kickoff part and just bring in my expertise around the Pit Crew Challenge. And that developed some fantastic partnerships that put me in front of companies I never would have gotten in front of. We have worked with the veritable Fortune 100, and currently, I would say we're working with 3 of the top 10 in the Fortune 100. Those are my current deliveries, clients that I could never have gotten in front of.
What if it all was going through your mind about bringing in, I'll call them teammates, as opposed to being used to, I'm assuming that at that point, in your speaking business and any other endeavors, you would have been more or less a solo act. Is that true? So yes. How did you feel about opening up to it? Because now you're taking on other people, not just to have to try to manage it and coordinate schedules, but the whole crux of the presentation changes as well. What did that feel like?
It's difficult when you are someone who likes to control things, and
Guilty.
Yeah, exactly. So the interesting thing about speakers, the reason why a lot of speakers do what they do, is because they'll say, "I'm at the front of the room. Everyone else, be quiet now. I'm in charge," and there's a lot of introverts actually working on the stage that you think are tremendous people, or people persons, I guess you'd call it. Where when they're off the stage, they really don't like crowds. And the reason why they can perform well on the stage is because they are in control of the environment. And for me to be able to give up pieces of this to somebody else, who, I mean, certainly they had their expertise and that was all in good, but I didn't know what was going to come out of their mouth. And was it going to be good or was it not? And I got very, very lucky. It worked so well, and the trust was there right from the get-go, right from the very beginning. But I have to admit, though, that trust filtered slowly at the very beginning, right? We had lots of conversations about what this is going to look like and actually who is in charge of certain things. I'm in charge of the learning. My race guys are in charge of the race car and the safe stuff and how tires get changed. I am not in charge of that. Eventually, as I got to know more and more about how tires change, and I can do it quite well, actually, believe it or not. But once I became better known at that, then I could support those conversations and understand them better. But I had to let them have it. I had to actually unconditionally hand it to them and say, well, they're the experts, and I'm just going to pray that they do well.
See, I've got anxiety just thinking about going out and doing a presentation and having the wrong PowerPoint slides click up, right?
Yeah, that can happen.
Everybody's got technology nightmare stories.
Or your clicker
right?
doesn't work, or
any of those things. You're dealing with an actual live, what is it? Probably about a 3,000-pound late model stock car. It's real. It's not a prop.
Yeah.
It's a real machine that you're going to jack one side of it up, actually take the tires off, and you've got the people from these businesses hands-on.
Yep.
So the opportunity for things to go sideways, and as I'm saying this, I'm thinking, okay, both there's a potential anxiety, but on the other hand, it also speaks to the whole point of the exercise, doesn't it?
It really does, right? Because the participants now live that.
Yeah.
And I certainly had to live through that as well. And we have as a team, and everything that we talk about on our team, we buy into, and we do live it. And that is become the foundation of where the speaking business has gone, is that idea of expertise. It's not just because you can speak. Sure, you need that. People are not so much concerned about your ability to speak as they are, where are you coming from and what do you know and what have you experienced?
Yeah.
And we've experienced all those things. We were in New Jersey and pulled the race car out of the truck and trailer, and the engine didn't start. And we were 2 hours before we were to deliver a program. Fortunately, I have one of the best crew chiefs around who built that race car. And he had me run into a phone book, and it was a phone book at the time because they still have those. Call up Napa, get them to deliver this part over here. I called up Napa. They said, we don't deliver to parking lots. I said, here's my credit card. I don't care what you charge. 3 times as much. I don't care. Just get me this part. And they had that part in that parking lot in 20 minutes, and my crew chief had it installed. And that car was running before the program ran. And those things have happened. We've had drive shafts break in the middle of our programs and things. Things go. But when you got a professional team that knows what they're doing, we just roll with it. So
that's like how racing actually is, and that was part of what led me to spending some time in my career around it. Is that the resilience and the resourcefulness and the creativity shown by people like that when you're under the gun, when you're clearly done, you're defeated.
Yeah.
And then they
still pull something out.
They whack-a-mole it right back up, right?
Absolutely. And you know what? And that is why I love this sport so much. So when we go back 16 years ago, not knowing much about this sport, and here I am today with such a profound appreciation for it as a sport. And anyone who says it's not a sport does not understand it at any sort of deep level, to realize what it takes to actually make that happen. There's a lot of gut. There's a lot of grit. There's a lot of overcoming challenges, and these guys are doing it every single day to try to take that checker flag. It is not simply just get in your car and drive it for a couple hours. It is so far beyond that.
No, a long way from it. Let's talk about you got the program together. You've got a couple of, I want to call them gigs, races. Anyway, you've got a couple of dates booked. What happens in the first few of them? What was the experience like?
Well, we did it once, and with this client, and I said to Ron and Ken, I said, we might do this again. This worked out really well. And they said, yeah, sure. Okay, well, call us. And it was about 6 weeks later that I got a call from Duke University, the business school, Fuqua School of Business. And they had a client. And they asked us if they could utilize our program. So, right out of the gate, they were asking us questions about, have you done it this way? Have you done it that way? No, we could, sure. And being open. So the big part was being open to what this program could entail. And so we went from doing it with a simple manufacturing plant. I mean, the plant was owned by a larger conglomerate, but it was a one-off activity. To then working with the number one corporate education organization in the world. And Duke still holds that title, particularly in North America. And it was a whole different level of understanding how this program could be utilized and what experiential education really did mean. So it was... There were challenges, but amazing opportunities. The people I met doing that first program, the participants shared so many key insights that it helped actually develop the learnings and the core to the material over the years. It probably took about 3 years of running the program to develop it into a good core of this is what we teach. And it came from the participants. Again, it came from just listening and being open to what their needs were and what their desires, the things that they needed to learn and talk about.
So you've touched on where I was going to go next. Is you've been doing this, did you say 16 years?
We're in our 16th year.
So how has it morphed and changed over that time?
So we've gone, again, global.
Yeah.
we've had opportunities to take our program, frankly, around the world. We've had opportunities in Hong Kong and Singapore, clients that have asked us, good clients that we have relationships with. It's just challenging to get those logistics down and for us to be able to deliver. We're very adamant about the fact that we use our equipment, that we don't borrow other people's because we've tried. It was not successful. Things that we don't want to try to do again. We're very comfortable with what we have. But the program developed as organizations wanted to put more people through. How could we get more than your typical size? I had a conversation with a potential client today. Can we bring 2 race cars? What would that look like? Can we get more people through if we have 2 race cars? So we have done that in the past, and we continue to have those conversations when it's possible.
So what else? We've talked about race cars and racing, but in a broader sense, what are some of the things, the themes, for want of maybe a better word, Bob, and activities that you're running people through, and what do they come away from it with?
So the greatest theme that we drive in this program is about high-performing cultures. Okay. I mean, that high-performance piece that we see in racing or that we think of when we think of racing. But it is about culture and trying to get how people behave and how they treat each other at a very high-performing level. So we learned that our program was about high performance, and it wasn't just about changing tires. It was about how the culture behaves. And there are elements, there are things that drive culture every single day. And we know the simple ones, things like trust and risk and relationships and things of that nature. They certainly drive culture. But there is our openness and our willingness to share and coach each other, to have those critical and crucial conversations that really make that culture a difficult thing to land. In theory, we can tell you the checklist of all the things you need to do to make it happen. But then there's the actual doing it. And in our program, we've discovered that it's easy to play in that environment, and it's easy to understand how it should work. It's the real win is when people are able to take it back to their workplace and actually use it. So that high-performing culture really comes down to collaboration, breaking down silos within organizations, not keeping information from other people within our organization so that we can continually get better and better at what it is that we do. And the rich metaphor of the NASCAR pit crew is they're always wanting to do better. And when they first started focusing, if you go back into the history of NASCAR, when they first started focusing on doing better, it was taking them maybe about a minute to change the tires. I mean, you can YouTube videos, some old videos of how long it would take them to change it, and you'd laugh hysterically if you saw what they used to do. And they probably were down into maybe the 20 to 30 second range when they really started to focus on it, knowing that if they could gain 1 second in the pits, that was a huge difference between winning races and losing races. And now we see teams that are spending, millions of dollars to develop a new air gun that can take off 0.4 of a second. And if they can take off 0.4 of a second, that's the difference between first and third place. So we see it in our program that driving that continuous improvement culture is really about high performance. And the metaphor just keeps getting richer and richer and better all the time.
What is it now? I admit I haven't watched a race in a while, but last I checked, I think it was down around 12, 13 seconds that they can... Does that sound about right?
Just sub 12. So you're actually seeing... Yeah, you're seeing some teams that can hit in about 11.4, 11.5. And there was some changes in NASCAR in the past year where you didn't have to tighten all the wheel nuts. Then there was some safety issues, so they had to change that. They rethought that. And from what I understand, there's actually they may be implementing one fewer person on the team. So just to make those pit stops a little more challenging, they may be dropping them to 5 people.
I don't want to stop us for too long, but so that you can get a little context, if you even just think for a moment about how long 12 seconds is, we could sit here and count it out. It would only take us 12 seconds.
That's right.
But for 3,000 some odd pound race car that when you watch it on TV, when it's coming down pit road, it looks like it's going really slowly, but it's about the equivalent of around about 80 kilometers an hour, I think, somewhere in there.
50 miles, yeah.
So if you think about how it feels when you're doing that, now imagine yourself jumping out in front of it. And, oh, by the way, there are 42 others that are all trying to do the same thing.
At the same time,
At the same time. And getting it to stop just exactly in the right spot. Get all 4 tires removed. Reattach all 4 tires, hopefully with all the lug nuts tight. Otherwise, You're going to be in a bad way in a short time.
That's right.
And get all the fuel in it and whatever other adjustments that you might want to make to the car.
Right.
And people would be amazed at what you can do inside 10 or 12 seconds. And then get it out and going again. When you think about a second, 1 second when the cars are at full speed, depending on where they are, can be hundreds of yards worth of distance.
It is 100 yards. Typically.
So it's really kind of mind-blowing when you think about it like that. But then I'm thinking, Bob, about translating that onto the business environment, about how little can become big, whether it's tightening up all of those things about culture that you just talked about and really getting everybody going in the same direction, and how all those little things can add up to make a big impact. But at the same time, all it takes is for one of those lug nuts to not quite be tight enough for everything to be thrown into a bad vibration. What's it like when you see the light bulbs go on for people when they're engaging in that?
Oh, it's absolutely brilliant when people realize that the small things become big things later on.
Yeah.
As you said, the one lug nut loose after about 2 or 3 times around the track, depending upon the size of the track, depending upon the speed of the car, et cetera, et cetera. There's some physics involved. Yes, you're right. That tire starts to vibrate, which causes all the nuts that were tight, all the good work you did do, starts to fall apart. And then after a couple more laps around the track, the tire falls off and the car ends up hitting the corner. And we've seen races where that happens. And when the participants get it, when they see that some of the small behaviors that we do that are not aligned to our ultimate end result are causing us to have these vibrations or these distractions, it can cause an awful lot of distraction actually in our organization. You know, I say that I don't have a particular research that I can quote it, but when I say this to managers and leaders in organizations, that 40% of your time is fighting fires. And they all nod and they, oh yeah, it's probably at least that. Mm-hmm. If 40% of your time is fighting fires, those fires are the vibrations. That if we could eliminate those vibrations, imagine how much more high performing that we would be. So it's getting it right at the very beginning. And once we got it right, it all flows.
Or even if you could get half, imagine getting 20% of your time back, especially if 40% of that time wasn't spent fighting the fires. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely true. You know, there's a great example that just happened in business recently. Wells Fargo, we've heard in the news, 5,300 employees were fired because they sold products. Well, actually didn't sell them. They signed customers up for products that they didn't know they signed up for. And the CEO lost his job as a result of it. The reason for that was because there was a reward system set in place that rewarded you signing up new products, selling new products. And the employees got bonuses and whatnot as a result of it. Those are the sorts of distractions that we had. It wasn't aligned to the values of the organization. In fact, the organization didn't want you selling stuff to customers that they didn't want. But boy, they sure wanted the extra products. And it caused share value to drop. It caused the CEO to lose his job. It caused 5,300 people now looking for new work somewhere else because things were not aligned. And that's one of the things that we teach in our program is what are those variables, and it comes out. We get to see the variables that drive that performance, and then we can attack it and change it and see what happens in that experiment as it goes along.
Since we started about halfway through, let's jump back closer to the beginning, because we never talked about how you got into the business of speaking to begin with. But before we do that, what can you tell me about little mini Bob Parker running around, and as best as you can remember, what were your interests as you were a kid, and what kind of things did you think that you might be getting into career-wise?
When I was a kid, when I was in elementary school, I thought I wanted to be a doctor. And I would go to our school library and I would read as much as I possibly could on any books they had around medical science or health. I knew more about cell structure
really?
and whatnot when I was at the age of 10. And everyone in my school thought, oh, Bob's going to be a doctor. And then I realized I wasn't quite that smart.
Where do you think that came from?
I really don't know. I have no family members that were in that profession. I was just kind of taken by the science of it. And by the fact that, this worked, then that worked, then this worked. So that's really where I kind of started. And then by the time I was graduating from elementary, going off into high school, I had completely realized that no, that's just not going to pan out. I maybe was at a hospital once and didn't like being in a hospital or didn't like sick people or something of that nature. I felt very uncomfortable around that in that environment. So I started looking at business. And my formative moment for me, and I believe I wrote this in the preface of my book on the PICU Challenge, which was everything I learned about business I learned in junior achievement. So I'm a product of the Junior Achievement Company program. I was in the program for 3 years when I was in high school. I learned entrepreneurialism. I learned how to run a business. And I learned by failing. Huge. I had my first year, we lost lots of money in that business. You can learn a lot when you lose lots of money. And of course, your junior achievement doesn't mean, when you say a lot, it's not actually a lot of money, but it is for your small business. And we had great mentors from businesses within the community that participated in that program. And after I graduated from that program, that's when I knew that speaking was something that I was really interested in, because we got exposed to that by some of their conferences and some of their conventions.
Okay.
And I got to drink the Kool-Aid from some pretty amazing speakers, and I thought, that's cool. That would be neat to do. And that's how I found myself here.
So how did that translate through your secondary and post-secondary educational journeys?
Yeah, so when I was in high school, I had a bent towards business, and I was taking computer science. I thought, that's the wave of the future. Got to understand these computer things, and I was actually very good at it. But I have to admit, I didn't really like doing it a whole lot. It was too isolated, too much work on my own. I needed to be around people. So when I went off to university, I went to Western, and I decided that I wanted to study more about knowledge. And so I took a degree in philosophy, and I wanted to understand critical thinking. I wanted to be able to know where ideas came from. And that's what I studied. So I studied story. I studied some different world religions. I tried to grapple with our reason for being, our reason for existing, and all those sorts of philosophical questions. And that played out very well for me when I started getting into the speaking business, and even more so as a facilitator when you're working with an audience. And it's not just you speaking, you're asking them questions and they're sharing ideas. If we jump to that time when I was creating the Pit Crew Challenge and it was morphing into what it became, those critical thinking skills became so crucial, because I was able to listen to what the participants said. And these were people who were already successful in business, doing very, very well, but wanted to go to the next level. And my job was just to kind of capture it and feed it back in a way that was meaningful for them and meaningful for everyone else in their organization. So critical thinking skills really helped build my business, and still does today. And the unfortunate thing and the shame is I don't think we teach critical thinking skills enough. That would be my complaint of our education system.
I was going to observe, and I will now, I'm comparing it through my own perspective, and for context of that, it took me well into my 30s before I realized that I wasn't as happy as I thought I was, and didn't have the communication and emotional maturity skills that really would have been a benefit to me. And it's amazing how life can change once you can grasp that. So for you to describe yourself as I'm going to guess, late teenager, early into your 20s, already able to diagnose for yourself some of those things, where do you think that came from, to be even able to recognize that at that age?
Yeah, I have a very smart father and a mother who is equally as smart, with a great attitude.
See, I have smart parents too, but
yeah.
I didn't listen to them.
Yeah. But my parents, my father always told me he didn't care what I did. He was a tradesman. He was a typesetter by trade. And he told me, though, I only had to take one course in high school, and this is during the early 80s. He says, the only course that you must take is typing, because when my dad got into typesetting in the 50s, you didn't type. You actually put little pieces of lead in a block and then poured more lead over top of it. And as that industry changed in the 80s with the advent of the Apple computer and all sorts of desktop publishing, here's my dad, who was typesetting for years and years and could not type. But he recognized that typing would be very, very important, especially if I want to do computer programming or something of that nature, that I should take it. And so those sort of critical thinking skills, to be able to look forward into the future and see what's coming and what am I going to need, I learned that from my father. Even though he didn't share much, he just said, "Can you see it?" And I was like, "Yeah, no, I can see that, and I can buy into that." And yeah, I did take typing. I took 2 years of it. And I used to work for him, and I used to type books during the summer and became very good at typing. Not a career aspiration, but it was something that helped me along the way. And I guess I was very fortunate to be in an environment where I wasn't forced to do something that my parents wanted me to do. I think that is an absolute travesty. I was encouraged to explore the things that made me happy, and Junior Achievement helped me a lot with those sorts of things. They allowed you to fail, and we need more opportunities in our world which says failure is okay, because we only learn from failure. And if you actually think about it for a moment, we don't learn from our successes, because we only know that if we just keep doing it that way, we'll be fine. But we can't adjust. We can't adjust the course as we go along if things stop behaving that way. We joke about my race team, and my crew chief, Ken, he'll be the first to tell you, do you want to know why I know how to fix that? Because I've probably done it wrong at some point, and it didn't go well, but he's okay to try it. And a lot of our educational programs that are out there now in the world are trying hard to embrace that aspect of failure. And I don't know that we're willing participants in it as we'd like to be.
Yeah, you can't fail if you haven't tried something, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very difficult to fail when you remain in action.
Yeah.
And that kind of takes us to where we were before, when you were faced with the idea that you had created. There were all sorts of opportunities presented to you of potential failures, and you went for them anyway. But let's get back on the track of, after you were at Western, did your desire for a speaking career stay with you through university, and was it there beside you when you landed on the other side of graduation, or what was going on?
Yeah, it did. It was developed in my university years. So I was I was fortunate enough that through Junior Achievement that I got a scholarship to the Dale Carnegie program. And so at the age of 19, I took a program that teaches public speaking. It's actually a program on human relations skills, but it uses public speaking as the means to teach that. And it does it very well. And because of that, I learned to speak quite well. And I also developed a relationship with people in that industry who were speaking for a living. And so it did stay with me. And unfortunately, a lot of the volunteer work that I started to do, because of my Junior Achievement experience, the whole program was volunteer driven. If it wasn't for the volunteers, I wouldn't have had the experience that I had. So what it taught me to do is to give back and volunteer. So at the age of 19, I was volunteering with the Canadian Cancer Society. I was certainly volunteering at Junior Achievement. I was volunteering with things at the university. I was giving back as much as I possibly could. And what I did was I was very strategic in my volunteering. I looked for opportunities that would allow me to speak. I did programs, went to high schools and spoke at high school assemblies for the Canadian Cancer Society, managed to develop some core material, some stagecraft, because I just did it over and over and over again. And so it was always there. And eventually, when I graduated from university, my first job actually was working for Junior Achievement. I was their manager of programs. And, of course, their educational programs. And I had the opportunity to teach others and other volunteers how to teach the programs that we teach. So I was doing train the trainer programs and going out and delivering those programs as well. So from the time I was quite young, I was delivering all sorts of different programs one way or another. And that stayed with me. I had that line of sight that said, what's this going to look like? And I did a lot of keynoting in my mid to late 20s. And that is the keynoting. That's the main stage. You're on stage everyone else quiet. Hopefully they laugh at my jokes. But everyone's listening to me. And over the years, that changed with Pit Crew, where the keynoting stuff, I still do some of it, but I've morphed into more of that sort of facilitation training. So when I'm at the front of the room, I can command a room with a presence and still let it be about them.
What are some of the core messages that you took to the stage when you first started out? Maybe outside of, you mentioned speaking for, say, the Cancer Society, but once you really had kind of established yourself as your own, I hesitate to say your own brand, but your own brand, what was some of that core messaging that you started out with?
Well, you mentioned at the beginning, you talked about walk on wet paint.
Yeah.
And that was a real brand for me. The branding of walk on wet paint was about the concept of, we sometimes find ourselves stuck. We find ourselves saying, I'll wait until. I'll wait until the kids graduate from school. I'll wait until I get the new job. I'll wait until I retire, or whatever the scenario is, I'll wait before we venture out and try something new. And the analogy is very similar to painting yourself into a corner and saying, well, I'll wait for the paint to dry before I venture out. Well, as the analogy goes, you have to realize that the paint never dries. It's always going to be wet. So if you actually want to embrace life and get something out of it and make those changes, you have to learn to walk on wet paint. Now, when you start, it's not going to be comfortable. You're going to want to retreat very quickly. Yes, you might make a mess. But if you resign yourself to the fact that, yeah, I'm going to have some failures, I'm going to make some mistakes, and I can fix that as I go along. I can paint behind me as I get myself out of this corner. Then when you get on the other side, you're now somewhere that you needed to be. And that was the beginning of my speaking, was to talk about that theme, walk on wet paint, to challenge my audience members to try things in spite of what other people said, what other people were telling you, in spite of what you told yourself. And the great thing is, as my career moved on, I found myself living that more often than not. And the Pit Crew Challenge is a perfect example of myself walking on wet paint.
How did you come up with that?
The walk on wet paint idea? I think I was, one day, I think it was on University Hill, Western, probably philosophizing, maybe writing some poetry or something of that nature, and came up with that idea. So that was just some writing that I did, and it stuck as an image, and it became my theme for years.
I'll share, not to make it about me, but just a quick personal contribution, if you don't mind, is that when I started in my radio career, I still remember registering Kevin Bulmer Enterprises. And the reason why I did that, Bob, which is back around 98, 99, was because I knew I wanted to speak. And I still remember exactly where I was, sitting behind the control board at CHOK Radio in Sarnia. And I said to myself something along the lines of, well, you're perfectly at home in front of a crowd, and you can get up and you can talk to them and you can hold the attention of a group. But you're just a kid. Who's going to want to listen to you? You don't have anything to say. You haven't done anything yet.
Right.
I didn't have the context, and this is why I stopped you when you talked about wanting to explore philosophy and critical thinking and whatnot. I didn't know that I was probably 20 years away from knowing what a limiting belief was. 20 years later, a lot of life goes in between there, and then back onto the path of, even the fact that I'm sitting here with you, to go, oh, okay, we're going to pick back up on that thread, but to know, you just get moving forward. You slip and you slide on the paint. Yeah, right. You are going to mess up maybe your favorite pair of pants, and you're going to fall. But if you want to know how to fix an engine in the middle of parking lot in New Jersey, or come up with a whole crew of people to bring something into reality that only was just an idea that came out as the part of a meeting, these are the things that I wish to support your point of what you would like to see taught earlier in life, that I would have been able to grasp intellectually and emotionally probably 20 years before I did. And so now in a desperate attempt to try to figure out how to turn this back around into a question. But it fascinates me that you were able to see that at such a young age and then get up, I'm assuming, in front of all kinds of different adults and experienced professionals and present this to them. So what sort of reactions were you met with back then?
Well, I can remember some of the ones that it was, an odd reaction. I do remember getting hired by a company, walking in the door saying, "I'm your speaker," and I'm in my late 20s, and the CEO looked at me, said, "You're our speaker," with his eyes wide open, looking down at me, and I said, "Yeah," and I knew exactly what was going through his mind, like, who's this kid? And I'll be honest, I never won him over because he had that preconceived idea right from the beginning. But I didn't let that stop me from giving my presentation, from doing what I was asked to do and was prepared to do by the people who hired me. It wasn't him that hired me, it was his staff. And I delivered what I was asked to do. I do remember a number of opportunities when I first did a planning session. I was facilitating a strategic planning session for an organization, and they said, "Have you ever worked for an organization like ours before?" And I said, "No," and that's exactly why you want to hire me. Well, why is that? I said, "Well, because I have no preconceived ideas about how your organization should run. Therefore, I'll facilitate and not consult." And he goes, "You're hired because that's what I want." And then he says, "Now, you realize we've got some pretty strong personalities in the room. The CEO is also the mayor of the town and can really run a room." I said, "Don't worry." And I made sure he didn't run the room and that I was in charge. The funny thing is they referred me to other clients. And when the next client said, "Have you ever worked with other industries before, in our industry?" I said, "Yes, I have." They said, "Oh, you have experience. That's great. That's what we want." So it was a matter of trying to understand a little bit about your audience. But yeah, I've had plenty of those things where it was going to be risky, right? That the audiences weren't always going to buy in. And I think that's where I learned that you have to make sure that the audience is right for you. I don't know that I would do it the same way that I did it back then. Mm-hmm. If I was getting in the business today, the advice I give to other speakers or people wanting to get into this business is know your audience and know that you're the right person for that audience, and that know where your expertise ends, know where it starts, and know what you can contribute. And be very careful about how far outside of that you go. You can stretch yourselves in some ways, but you can't fake what you do not know.
It sounds like you had a lot of confidence. What were a couple of times maybe that you remember being uneasy or maybe even scared going into a situation, and how did you overcome it?
So I learned very young, and this was part of my training in Dale Carnegie, which was the fight or flight physiology. It's actually the same physiology. Whether you stand up and fight or whether you run away, your body's doing the same thing. The difference is what you say in your head. And when it comes to being nervous or being excited, it's the exact same physiology. If you think about it, yes, your palms start to sweat, you get that pit in your stomach, you just want to either run away or fight. And what I learned very young was to tell yourself when you start to feel nervous and you think it's nervousness, just to tell yourself that you're actually excited and that you just can't wait to get out there and do this. And when you take that energy, because it is an energy, and you'll say there's lots of sports figures and performers who still have that energy, but when you can take it and use it to your benefit. So, were there times that I was nervous? Sure. But I tried very hard to shift what was on in my head to say, I can do this. I'm not overstepping what it is I know. I'm not going to overstep what it is I know. I'm going to learn from this. By the time I'm done, I will know more than I knew yesterday. So I'm not going to oversell myself and pretend to be something that I'm not. The times that I was nervous, which I probably erased from my memory, were the times where I was speaking about something that I didn't have the right to speak about. So as long as you've earned the right to speak about it, you shouldn't be nervous. If you're speaking about your own experiences, you have the right to speak about it. In fact, you have more right to speak about your experiences than anybody else on the planet. And if you start there, you always have that expertise. So if you can tell a story about the time when you did this, that's a fair place to start. When you're telling a story about the time when you saw somebody else do something, you were there at least to see it, so you might have some. But if you tell a story about something that you heard somebody do, then you have every right to be nervous, and you will be. So I just tried to avoid those things in my career.
I'm imagining somebody holding the tiger by the tail, and the tail kind of getting longer and longer, and finally slipping away, and now you're locked in the room with a tiger.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Don't put yourself in situations where you're going to be annihilated. Right, you've got to take risks. There's no question you've got to take risks, and you've got to open yourself to things that you think you may not be able to do, but you find that level of comfort in stopping and saying, "Hey, this is what I'm prepared to learn. This is what I'm prepared to risk." Because failure says, "I'm prepared to fail, but I only want to fail this much." Right? I'm not going to bet the entire house on that roulette wheel. I'm not going to bet everything on that one. But I'm prepared to try a little bit here and a little bit there.
So you've been doing the Pit Crew Challenge now for 16 years?
Yes.
So, and it sounds as if there's still is a lot of, well, we'll say racetrack up ahead of that vehicle, and a lot of potential opportunity for that to morph and grow and change. But beyond that, what, if anything, Bob, would represent some of the wet paint that you may be perceived to be in front of you for where you are now in your journey?
What a great question. You caught me at a moment in my life where I've been thinking about that quite hard. And that is, what else can I offer to take what I've learned to that next level, or give people an opportunity that maybe can't be in my Pit Crew Challenge program to actually get some of those sorts of learnings. So, I'm looking at developing a coaching program around some of those learnings for people who've been through the program so that they can then implement it in their organizations. I'm also looking at some new writing a new book, and new projects around that come out of some of the learnings that have developed from my program over the years. So that's where I'm going. Just new products.
Well, there's never going to be any end to the way that you can spin it, I'm thinking, because it's just, I'm fascinated by, even though you've got a program that I'm guessing you've got the certain angles that you want to hit and the process that you want to take everybody through wherever you go. I'm only guessing that no two experiences are exactly alike, and that after 16 years, and that's only just the Pit Crew Challenge, I'm not even including all of the formative time behind that. The people that you've met, the experiences that you've had, the environments that you've seen, the things that have gone spectacularly well, the things that have gone spectacularly poorly.
There have been those.
I'm betting that if you think about it, you've probably got a lot of material to draw upon. It's just a matter of whether you want to be able to, because you can only put so much energy into so many things at once, right?
That's right. In order to do something exceptionally well.
Yeah.
Right? So we ultimately learn that we can't multitask. The brain just does not know how to do it. It has to shut off one thing in order to focus on another. So you've got to bring in people to help you with things as you need to. And again, I'm the type that likes to be able to make sure that when it's done right and done well, and I want to have my hand in it. So I know that about myself. That I'm going to be cautious about who I bring in and how I grow things. I've seen things in Pit Crew after 16 years, over 16,000 people through the program. Just our last delivery, there was people do things I've never seen before, and it still makes me laugh. The program, I have so much fun delivering it, and I'm still learning things as we go through. People share ideas, and they go, "Wow, that's brilliant." After all these years, no one said that, but what an amazing connection! And that's what's brilliant about experiential education, is that people bring themselves to it, and then they get to deposit a piece of themselves in that program. So the Pit Crew Challenge continues to grow because it's got 16,000 plus people who have all dropped a little piece of themselves in it. And I'm the conduit that gets to carry that out to the next group and say, hey, would you like to learn from the 16,000 that have come before you? It's a pretty good catchment when you say, is this stuff working? The brilliance is when I can share with a potential client, here's some of the things that we would talk about typically. I said, is there anything more you'd like to add? And they go, you've covered it well. This is good. This is where we want to be. And that makes me feel very good.
Sounds like it's been an enjoyable run so far, and lots more clear skies hopefully ahead of you. I wish you all the best of success, and thank you so much for taking this time, Bob. May all your lug nuts stay tight.
Thanks very much, and thanks for having me.
You can learn more about Bob online at bobparker.ca, or learn more about the Pit Crew Challenge at pitcrew.ca. You can also connect to Bob on Twitter. You'll find him at pitcrewbob, or on Facebook at facebook.com/The Pit Crew Challenge. Reach out and say hi to Bob. I'm sure he'd be happy to hear from you. You can reach me at kevinbulmer.com. NoScheduleMan.com will take you to the same place. All my social channel links are up there in the upper right-hand side, as is the sign-up for the email VIP list. Join me on the journey. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, remember, no plan is all part of the plan. Sometimes you just gotta let go. Just keep moving, all right? I'll see you next week when we explore another journey on the No Schedule Man podcast.
Just a little deja vu.